It was 80%, 20%.
Well, it's 5:30. We'll call our meeting to order for the Aberdeen City Council. Carl, roll call, please.
Councilmember Remley. Here. Ronayne. Lunsman. Here. Slate Hansen. Here. Johnson. Here. Bunceness. Here. Olson. Here. Rux. Here. Mayor Leifson.
Here. Join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would entertain a motion to approve last week's minutes, please.
So moved. Second.
Motion Johnson, second by Rux. If there are no changes, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. We have no one needs to speak to us on open forum with the exception of the listed item on the agenda, the presentation of the Aberdeen Growth Plan. And Brett, do you want to introduce the folks?
Yes.
And we'll turn it over to them.
After 2 years of diligently working on a growth plan for Aberdeen, I believe we have come with a final draft that we'd like to share with the council. After tonight's presentation, we'll be asking for, next week we'll be asking for a vote of adoption by the city and the county as well. And doing the presentation tonight would be Karen Day and Peggy Harder from Stantec.
And since I'm shorter than Peggy, I will stand up. Well, Stantec has been working with Helms and Associates very closely with the city to develop this plan, and we're just really, it's been a wonderful experience for all of us to get to know the city and what your aspirations are for the future, and we're pleased to present what you want for the city. This is not my plan or Peggy's plan, it's what your citizens and what many of you have come to our public meetings, and we really appreciated that. And even saw many of you at that pheasant sandwich event that the chamber had. And, after a couple of cocktails and pheasant sandwiches, we had a very nice discussion about what the city should look like in 2045. So here we go. So, any of you who have not, you have copies of the documents, and anyone in the audience, at the bottom of every slide, it has the name, the link to the AberdeenGrowthPlan.com. And every document that we've produced and presented to the public or sent out in emails are all included there. This is a screenshot of that website as it is late last night. And it includes the January 7th draft you see there and all the appendices that you got copies of, and the maps. And if you scroll down, there's the dates from the last public meeting we had, which was December 11th, and the meeting that was before that, and the public meeting that was before that. So the information is there, and we've been really gratified at how many comments. You see at the top of it, it says submit comments, and how many comments the public has sent to us. I didn't even introduce myself. My name is Karen Day, and I'm a community planner. And Peggy Harder is our transportation planner engineer. And most of the comments actually were addressed to Peggy. So we asked the people at the meetings, which intersections they were concerned about. We had maps so they could put stickies on there of any traffic concerns they had, or where they thought new trails should be, or any parts of the city we should pay a lot of attention to. And, lots of the comments, came. And I'm very proud, I guess, to say that we reviewed and considered every single comment from those stickies. In the appendix that you have, there's copies of those maps and the stickies, and we had a community survey and had hundreds of people weigh in on issues of that. But we responded to every comment, and actually all but one are reflected in the plan. And that one was a concern about traffic and what should be done in that intersection. When we studied it, it was not so bad as whoever wrote it thought it was. So it's been a good process. As most of you know, the last plan was adopted a long time ago, and the city has changed dramatically since then. And the horizon for this plan is 2045. We like to look way out. The purpose of these plans is a number of things, but to focus on the future. Primarily, there are lots of plans that you all have done. You just finished a housing plan, and there's all kinds of plans you do for the city. But this particular one looks at the physical growth and the infrastructure needed to support that growth. That's the purpose of a comprehensive and a future land use plan. It looks at a vision for the future, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for us, it was encouraging that when the steering committee and the public looked at visions for the future, they thought the vision from 2004 fit perfectly, with today. It's the same vision, and we'll go through that. And then practically to assist the city in decision making, whether that decision is for a rezoning request or for infrastructure improvement or for priorities in funding. So you'll have more ammunition, more information to support those decisions. So that's what the purpose of the plan is. Community input. We have pages and pages, and you really should look at it because some of the questions were open-ended. What do you like best about the city, or what should the city focus on? And it's interesting, say that. And those responses, I did spell check them. I did do that, but otherwise it's exactly as the people submitted it. Good, bad, or indifferent. The text is there. What do you like most about living and working in the city? And this is what they said. And the safety of the city. The city's record as being a safe community for families and for people working here came up over and over. Friendly, small town feeling. Those are the things that we heard from the community. And they love the parks. It is just really interesting. This question, I only have a couple of questions because they were really important in our focus. As it plans for the future, Aberdeen will have priorities. Which are most important to you? And the long green lines are what's the most important. And ensuring that roads and infrastructure meet the future demands of the city is, by far the most important. If you look over in the first column, keeping residents and businesses that are already here. Attract new people, but do your best to keep the people that are already here happy and staying. We also looked, and the answers were pretty clear. Looking at future infrastructure, what's the most important? And roads, water and sewer, really close second. And city engineer shaking his head.
You hear it all the time.
Yeah. And we gave them lots of choices, but that is what, and this was a survey. It was an online survey, and then we also distributed paper surveys, and people dropped them back off with Brett. Some of the community meetings, we had paper surveys. So, and we also surveyed the university students. In a lot of ways, their answers were different, but they wanted more stuff to do. But this infrastructure was pretty consistent across everybody. This is the vision for 2045, and it's exactly word for word the vision except for the date that was in the 2004 plan. I'm going to read it because it really is important. By the year 2045, Aberdeen will have strengthened its position as a regional hub city, providing citizens with ample economic opportunities, quality healthcare services, exemplary educational opportunities for lifelong learning, plentiful cultural and entertainment activities, retail diversity, and a lifestyle second to none. It's a lofty vision for the city, and I think it reflects what we heard at so many of the meetings. At the first public meeting, at the steering committee, and at the very first public meeting, we asked people what the planners, what our team should use as guiding principles for the work that we would do. And this slide and the next one have been repeated in every single meeting that we've had and everything we've sent out. The vision. This is what the vision is, and this is the guiding principles. And they're broken down into those few categories. There's another page after this one. But when you look at it, the land use, economic vitality, infrastructure. I'm looking for my notes on there. There we go. The first guiding principle, we addressed with the future land use map. We looked to see what the future population would be, and then, did our bookkeeping exercise to see how many acres worth that would cover. It worked out really well. And if you go through, and I'm not going to read these, but the housing, you've just finished a housing study, and in our implementation, we recommend that you keep a check on that. This, I should have mentioned it earlier, this plan is not intended to be in concrete. It's also not intended to be stuck on a shelf someplace for the next 20 years until you do it again. It's intended to be a living document, and we recommend that you look at it at least every year. You can amend it. You don't have to have a huge study to do amendments. If you see the city is changing in a way that's significant, then change the plan. I think the overall direction will probably stay the same, but the focus may be a little bit different. Livability and quality of life came up in all the surveys as really important for people. And the last is the transportation and infrastructure. As mentioned, it came up really high in the surveys as being important. And Peggy will go through the transportation recommendations, one by one. But and then the second one under there is the bicycle network, and Stantec is also working on the recreational trails program for the city. So you're already doing a lot of this, and we just encourage you to keep doing exactly the same. But these two slides have been in every document put out. It is our guiding principles as we move forward with the plan. We started looking at this project, trying to see how many people might be in the city in the year 2045. And, did all kinds of different methodologies for it and settled on 40,000 as a number. And this isn't a forecast of absolutely you'll have 40,000 or you can only have 40,000, but a target for you to plan to. So when you're looking at infrastructure and services, out to 2045, this is what the city might be. So, kind of stage your planning according to that. And 40,000 is a nice round number. The future land use map has lots of different colors on it. It includes property. The city boundaries are on this map. We have another version that's larger that includes the entire study area. A future land use map is a generalized map for guiding future development within the city. It's very, very, very different from your zoning map. Some of the categories it may say mid-density residential or high-density residential. But within that category, there's text that would say you could also have supporting office uses or some minor commercial uses within those categories. So they're very generalized categories. And the downtown, we initially had that reflecting its current zoning and thought the downtown is that pink color where downtown is and thought it made more sense to categorize it as a separate category to reflect the interest in having more mixed uses there. Whether they're mixed uses in the same building, commercial in the bottom and residential, or office and then residential up the top, or reflecting what the city is now, a building like this and then apartment building and then the hospital and, a mix of uses and not have it so specific exactly where each one could be. The zoning will show those details, but this is, in general, we expect a mix of uses, and this is the kind of things that would be in the downtown. The document goes through each of these categories, the rural, parks and open space, public, this is everything that's owned by the public. And planners are not all that creative. We use the same colors all the time for the maps. So for residential, the lighter the yellow, the least intense, and work up to the darker brown. And commercials, red. In planning, commercials is always a red. And downtown is the pink, and industrial is this purpley color. When we did the calculations for how much future development may cover the city or even areas outside of the current city boundaries. And we went back and looked at it. We had more areas designated than probably will be developed between now and 2045. So we looked at areas that we considered the primary growth areas, and that's what's on this slide. So these are areas that, based on trends today and the existing uses that are there today, that we expect would develop sooner than some of the other outlying areas. So in our looking at future infrastructure needs, that's where we focused. And as I mentioned, this is not intended to be in concrete, so that if all of a sudden, growth area 4 goes crazy and there's big residential subdivisions wanting to be there, then that's something that you could think about and revisit the map. But for now, those are the areas that made sense. And we brought these to at least 2 public meetings and had input from the citizens, adjusting a little bit, expanding one, changing the uses in another one to reflect what actually is going on or what's expected to happen. One thing that's really important in looking at this is the policies and that we would recommend that you look at to be sure that things are consistent or compatible with each other. So that if you're proposing a new industrial plant next to single family, maybe you want to take a little pause and be sure that it's not going to negatively impact those existing neighborhoods, existing residential, particularly, whether it's by putting a intermediate use in between or putting a buffer, or be sure that you don't block the sunlight is an old planning thing that people look at, or you don't cause a lot of extra noise or whatever the negative impact may be, particularly sensitive to those existing residential and even more so particularly the existing single-family residential uses. So those are the primary growth areas. And when we're looking at the future needs of those areas, we expect there will be infill, lots of infill or redevelopment, in the downtown. But we're looking especially for the needs for these new areas on the periphery of the city. And the first in line to talk about, it's not the first thing we studied, we looked at, and we coordinated with the Parks Department, the existing parks. The parks people have a rules of thumb that they use for parks for their service areas. So if you have a itty-bitty tot lot, it only serves a few people. And if you've got a big regional park, like the city has a number of those, it services, greater area. So we did maps showing the existing conditions, where those service areas cover. And then we did this one that shows, with the future development of the city, how much of those areas are already covered by the park service areas and how many are not. And it's no surprise at all that the areas that are currently not developed are not serviced by the existing parks. So that's what this map shows. The 2 areas that are not, we have 7 growth areas. The 2 that are not shown on here are the 2 primarily industrial areas. So there was no need for parks to service them. Trails to get to them, but not parks to service them. And you can see, looking at the map, those green circles, and then they kind of touch the edges of. If you look at the top of the map, the 2 and the 5, the green circles kind of cover the bottom of it because it reflects existing development. When you get to the edges, it's just not there. And then we looked at and in the document that you have, we've gone through each one of these and identified. So this is for the future water and sewer needs for each of the growth areas. And we went through each one of them, and each one has a map of kind of grouped them here. The blue and the green that are on the edges of those, the white shows the edges of the growth areas. And the blue and the green are the existing lines that are there. And the document talks about any unusual situations in any of them. Some of them have wetlands within them, and then a couple of them, more than a couple, if development, if and when development is completed as it's expected with the density shown on the future land use map, then maybe a new lift station or a adjustment to the existing lift stations might be needed, or a water tower in one of the instances. So it just kind of identifies up front the kinds of uses that would be needed if and when those areas develop. And we went through the 7, and some of them have more intrusion of the lines are already within the growth areas, but they mostly come kind of right to the edges. And to tell you the truth, that kind of just happened when we looked at areas that we thought would be future development, and then put these lines on and said, that was not a bad guess as to exactly where they would go. And you're ready for them. It's just another oomph of extending the lines or putting in a new lift station or a water tower for some of them. And some of them are really ready. And we went through the 7 like that. And then transportation, and Peggy won't let me talk about transportation so much.
Thanks, Karen. So as Brett said, my name is Peggy Harder. I did all things with transportation engineering and planning on the growth plan for Aberdeen. One thing I'd like to preface up front is that this was not a standalone transportation plan. What this was is the transportation chapter is a component of the 2045 Aberdeen Growth Plan. However, we did find throughout the public process that there was a lot of interest in it. So when you look at the 2045 Growth Plan, Chapter 6 covers transportation. It's actually a pretty big chapter within it. So I just kind of wanted to highlight, really the 5 things that this transportation chapter did. One, the City of Aberdeen just completed a standalone transportation plan in 2014. And what it did was it looked at that as kind of guiding principles for where some of the congestion and safety issues were already occurring. And we kind of laid that over with some of the comments and feedback that we were getting from the public as we made a few recommendations for the transportation system. 2, Karen already mentioned, we did look at your goals in your current comprehensive plan for transportation. And if you compare the 2004 comp plan to this one, I revised the transportation goals quite a bit to better align with Federal Highway's, drive for kind of having a performance-based transportation system. So if you look at those goals in there, really looking at them as you're making transportation decisions for your city. The primary need here was to look at what are our roadway network needs to serve the 7 primary growth areas, not laying them out for a final development plat or plan, but really what we're talking about is the functionally classified roadways that are not local roadways but are collector above, so that you guys are preserving the right-of-way needs, preserving the corridors, doing proper access spacing as it's identified in your 2014 transportation plan, and ensuring that as those development plats and proposals come in, that you're looking at them and saying, okay, let's go look at primary growth area number 1. Are we preserving a collector roadway to serve this future, residential neighborhood? And finally, we kind of had a special task that we included on this project that was a little bit unique to a transportation component of a comp plan, but it was something that the city asked us to do right up front and that we were scoped to do for this project. And it was to identify and really do a detailed analysis of 3 problematic intersections within the city of Aberdeen. And we worked through a process with the public and with our stakeholders and our steering committee members to identify those intersections. So we'll kind of hit the highlights of that as we go through the presentation. Karen mentioned to you guys that we did a lot of due diligence with public involvement. What you're going to see on this page is kind of a compilation of things that we pulled together that stood out for the public comments that we received at our meetings and our community surveys. Although transportation and roads showed up as the number 1 thing that the public wanted us to plan for in the survey, what we found generally from the surveys is the city is pretty happy with your current transportation system, but they want to maintain that. They don't want to see a lot more delay in their trips when going to work. And just a couple areas of focus is they picked out a few intersections and a few items to call out, but the majority of the issues and comments that we received from the public were on Melgard and on Highway 12. Where we were seeing a lot of issues with capacity. And when we did go back and compare that, and we'll see that at the end of this presentation, to your current transportation plan, A lot of crashes occurring when we did a new crash analysis for the entire city along Highway 12, and a lot of capacity issues there. So you are going to see in the implementation matrix at the very back of your plan where we are talking about recommending that the city look at doing a detailed corridor study analysis of Melgard because of all the growth you've had south of the city. You really need to study it kind of solidly as a corridor from end to end. Specific intersections where they're having issues, if you make improvements at one intersection, can improve those downflow, but really determining if you can add capacity and in which intersections you should make those improvements. Because as you can see, one of our primary growth areas is also to the south that will only add congestion to that roadway that's already seeing some today. And then the other one with US 12, state-owned roadways. So the recommendation there is to really approach the state and talk about maybe identifying a corridor study ahead of their next improvement project so you can really look at safety, crashes, traffic operations, all those things, but really not looking at it just for what's occurring today, but looking at it for the growth in this plan out to the year 2045 so that they're not doing a project that just responds to pavement needs, but responds to the capacity needs and the issues that we'll be having with the great problem of having growth. So one of the things that you'll see as an output of this plan is, like I said, a recommendation of future functionally classified roadways. So pretty sure most people here probably know what that means. Your local roadways just serve your local neighborhood. If you want to think of it, those vehicles are going to go to a collector. It's going to collect the traffic from your local roads and take it out to your arterial roadways, your more major roadways where you're trying to push traffic through. So what you're seeing here is the solid lines on this map are really your existing classified roadways. And for some of those existing roadways that are there today, we're making recommendations for increasing or changing that classification. And then we're going to go through those 7 primary growth areas and identifying areas where we say you may need a collector or arterial classified roadway as you're looking at those development plats and approvals. And really, what's the importance of identifying or making changes to some of these functional classifications? If you look at your 2014 transportation plan, it has some guiding principles as to when you're proposing a new access or a new development is proposed, you can see how that lines up with your plan depending on the type of roadway classification it is. So as you have more vehicles going on it, you typically increase the classification of that roadway. Might need to get it a wider right-of-way, but then you can look at those access spacings that you want to follow as part of your current transportation plan. So looking through our growth areas, the first one here that we looked at, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. They're spelled out in text and in large maps in your actual document. So growth area number 1 is really just the area that's south of Wiley Park. And you can see from the aerial that's underneath this, this is slated in that future land use map for primarily low density to medium residential growth. And what we're really recommending here from a transportation perspective, you can see the blue dotted line with the black underneath of it. So anytime there's a black line underneath of it, that's actually a road that doesn't exist today. So we're recommending it doesn't have to follow that corridor exactly, but we did look at some of the constraints from wetlands, from existing section lines, areas where it might be ideal, where existing accesses already occur, especially when they plug in to the state roadway, because you're going to have a harder time getting a new access there, and saying, some of the residential development that's already occurred along here actually kind of prohibits you from maybe putting an access where you would have. So as these new development plans come in, as you have developers approach you to develop these areas, to be mindful and really think of, in each of these growth areas, how do we connect the roadway into the existing system? Because we know that it might not look exactly like this, but as you have a development plat in front of you with a bunch of houses, we really want to ensure that we can get all those local streets and all those local roadways that are going to serve this housing development back to the collectors before you go back to your hierarchy arterial system. So we're not saying this is exactly where everything has to be, but we did really think out the access spacing from your current plan standards to where the access points come out, for example, onto 281 or onto Highway 12. where there's already access there today where we think the state will approve it, or where it meets your guys' standards for the non-state roadway systems. Area 2, again, a new roadway. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, but that new collector roadway, you're going to need something like that to serve development up there. Because you already have an existing north-south roadway at 288th, I was actually recommending that you're going to want 2 access points to serve that neighborhood. That one goes up to the north, east-west around County Road 10 there, and then if you connect them in, it just reduces your number of access points, but allows you that circulation through that primary growth area number 2. So again, kind of looking where the endpoints are at, but what it actually does is it goes through the development. Doesn't have to look exactly like that. Growth Area 3, south of Target. What we looked at here is where your existing roadway system is, where it collects into Highway 12 today, where 10th Avenue Southeast collects into East Melgard. And really, as that development continues, you might have some more commercial to the northwest portion of this, but looking at that residential for the most of this growth area, again, identifying that collector network that'll serve the local roadways. One of the things we looked at here is just where that connection would come in along the west side of it, and we looked at that lining up with Prospect Avenue Southeast because, again, there's already been some residential development along the very west boundary of this growth area that would prohibit it from coming in at 10th Avenue Southeast. So these, just an example of why it's so important to look at these things ahead of your growth occurring. Primary, the industrial growth areas. Oops, I skipped there. Growth Area 4, just east of Fossum Field. Just because of some of the existing ownership and how those property lines, we looked at just adding a collector system as that industrial area develops. Most of the north and the east portion of this are one single property owner, so not wanting to slate a road through there unless that parcel breaks down. Growth Area 5, just north of the Prairie's Edge subdivision, again, looking at a residential development. Some challenges here with Moccasin Creek to really serve any transportation to the east, but ensuring you have that collector system, maintaining that north-south connection, and then moving out to the west as you tie into North Roosevelt. Growth Area 6 was probably our biggest challenge. This is the kind of industrial area that's already out there today, with some room for some new industrial growth. What you're looking at here is you're just the southwest quadrant of the intersection of Highway 12 and US 281. Some challenges here to serve from transportation because you have so many existing access points right onto the roadways. But the city did their due diligence several years ago, and where you see where we're proposing the small collector roadway to serve the east portion of this development, the city actually does have easements to go through those existing driveways and along those property lines. Because of the creek here, because of some of the wetlands, we did identify in the plan that this might be a more challenging area to develop and to serve, but we did find that you could serve that the transportation network off of those existing easements that exist. And the final area south of Eisenhower Circle, Growth Area 7, we did a couple things here. You would have to change what's kind of serving as a driveway today with Bunker Drive, and that would have to become a city street, and you would take that down to the south and make it a collector roadway. We did identify that you would have to put in a bridge for the east-west collector that you would add in at some place over the waterway along the east side of the development if you were going to connect it all the way into Dakota Street on the east side of it. One comment that we have is this was originally looking at all residential development, but we actually changed it to be half residential on the north side and industrial on the south side, just because of the existing industrial property on the south side of that growth area today. We did identify that the road along the south boundary of this is gravel. It sees a lot of high trucks. As this area develops, we recommended that you maybe consider paving it and consider the speeds down there just as the city continues to grow down to the south. with that, that's kind of the transportation planning portion of the new growth areas, and just kind of keeping in mind as you get those development proposals, look and consider where you need your classified roadways at so that you're ensure that you're plotting for them. The last item that I mentioned that we were tasked with looking at for this project was to really look at 3 intersections to do kind of a detailed analysis on. And with these city we developed what we kind of did like a heat map here, city intersection issues. We did a few things. We looked at where was congestion identified in your 2014 Master Transportation Plan. We requested all new crash data from the South Dakota DOT and developed a high crash concentration map. So those are the colors you're seeing on the map. The dark purple representing areas of high crash concentration, and the yellow meaning there's a lower number of crashes occurring there today. We did not turn them into rates, as that really wasn't part of it, but just looking at the total number of crashes. We also did a voting at our first public input meeting where we asked members of the public, we're going to do this exercise, pick your top 3 intersections. So you can see the orange bubbles, 1 vote, 2 to 3 votes, or 10 votes or more, kind of based on the size of those orange dots, so you can see where we got votes.
The public loved putting those spots on the map.
Yes, they did. I think everybody that came to that first public input meeting voted for their top 3 intersections. And finally, again, the larger pink circles were those areas of high congestion shown in your master plan. So when we talk about going back to that very first slide I showed you where we got public comments, when you look at crash concentrations, public comments, and just the congestion shown from your 2014 plan, kind of is just a second gut check reiteration of when we made that recommendation. I talked about at the beginning of the plan of doing that more detailed study of both Melgard and US 12, because you can really see when you look at this map with all the different items we collected, those are the 2 areas that really stand out. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when we pulled all that data together, we brought it to our study review committee, our steering committee. We brought it to city staff and said, out of all this information, we're identifying what 3 intersections would you like us to do a more detailed analysis of? And the 3 that stood out were Highway 281, no longer Highway 281, and 8th Avenue Northwest, Dakota Street and 1st Avenue Southeast, and then West Melgard Avenue and South Lawson Street were the 3 that stood out. This detailed analysis is in an appendix. It's a big, thick document with a lot of engineering information in it. High-level analysis. 281 and 8th Avenue Northwest, you guys are all aware, is a very obscure intersection with the skews that occur there, with the speeds that occur out there. What we found is that the crashes that are occurring out there today are all primarily right-angle crashes. With the skews at that intersection, one of the recommendations that we came up with that you could implement in the short term is to implement no right on red. We feel there may be some sight distance issues with people turning on red and looking at some of the details of the crash data to see if that actually reduces some of your crashes. However, our longer term, our bigger term solution is actually we think the city should do a preliminary engineering study and actually lay out a roundabout at that location to deal with your skews. So those are our 2 recommendations, and you guys can take them for what they're worth, but we think those are both solutions that you can try. Short-term, lower cost, I would suggest to implement the no right on reds to see if that reduces the number of incidents occurring at that intersection. And if it doesn't, I think a roundabout would take care of your problems at that location. Dakota Street and 1st Avenue Southeast, we feel that after studying that intersection, it doesn't really have a crash issue. It has like a peak 15-minute, not even a peak hour, but a peak 15-minute congestion that's actually what we consider acceptable congestion. We did look at traffic volumes when we analyzed these out into our future year of 2045. We grew the volumes. We do think that you're going to see a higher peak hour congestion at this intersection as it grows. We did some analysis where we added turn lanes. If you lengthened the existing left turn lanes in the east-west direction, if you added right turn lanes or an auxiliary through shared right turn lane at this location, it does clear up that future congestion. So our recommendation here is just to keep an eye on it. And if the city does program a project at this intersection, to consider extending those left turn lanes or adding some additional auxiliary through and right turn lanes at this intersection. Not really a problem today, but will be likely as you move forward into the future and continue to see growth. And the third intersection we looked at with West Melgard Avenue and South Lawson Avenue, the concern that we received from a lot of people was just the congestion with the school, before and after school. The morning peak hour is a problem because not only do you have your school traffic, but you also have your morning commuters, so that time typically overlaps and occurs at the same time. And we did see a lot of congestion occurring at that intersection. Without adding capacity to that intersection through capacity, and just adding it at that intersection doesn't really fix it. It almost needs to be a corridor study approach where you kind of look at the corridor as a whole, see where can we maybe actually add some capacity and look at where is the actual best location to put a traffic signal. We looked at putting one here. It does solve your problems north-south. North-south traffic is waiting a really long time for that east-west traffic to go through. So it reduces their wait times, but then it adds a lot of weight to the east-west movement that normally just has the clear to go, which is a lot more of your traffic. But the level of service, the amount of wait times that your north-south traffic is having at that intersection is significantly long. It's a smaller number of vehicles that are affected than your east-west movements. So it's kind of like putting the signal there and doing nothing else is almost kind of just moving your problem around. Sometimes if you put a signal at an adjacent intersection, whether it be one to the west or to the east, that can then create a gap in your traffic, and that allows your north-south traffic to get across or make a left turn or whatever movements they need to be. And that's why I have a strong recommendation that the city actually study that corridor as one whole corridor, looking at it collectively. So with that is the end of our presentation for you guys tonight, and we are open for any questions or comments.
We've given you lots of material. We separated out the plan itself from the appendix because the appendix are interesting, but they're not governing documents. They're background reports and the community involvement, all the input from that, and the study that we did comparing Aberdeen to other cities that were similar in some fashion. And anyway, so you have a lot in the document. You have paper copies. Everything is online, as I mentioned earlier. I would encourage you to focus on a couple of things: the future land use map, the goals and policies, and then the implementation measures that you have. The implementation measures follow up on the goals and the policies. There's nothing new that's in there. We've been talking about those actions for a long time. So our next steps are to listen to your questions and any input that you have. If you have any adjustments or comments, please get them to Brett quickly. So that we can incorporate them. We've been really on top of incorporating anything as they've come along, and that's about it. And the only other thing we need to add to the document, other than your approval, are the acknowledgments, and we will put those in the front, saying how wonderful everybody was as we went through this process. But Peggy and I are here for whatever questions or comments or anything anyone has.
Questions, anyone? I just said, when you had an area where there was high traffic, was that high in relation to traffic accidents, high in relation to other areas, or unacceptably high? We weren't tasked with doing a crash rate. So with a crash rate, you actually look at the number of crashes occurring for the number of vehicles that travel through that intersection. We just looked at it as a total number of crashes that have occurred within a 5-year period. Okay. So you can compare it to the rest of the city, because the purpose that we did it was to pick 3 intersections within the city to analyze for improvements. So we thought it was a good comparison against one another within the city. Okay. That's a lot of information in a hurry for people to digest. We've all got our homework to do to look through it if we want. So no other questions, anyone, at this time? We'll have time for that after we look through it. So,
thank you.
Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you all.
And thanks, Brett, for going to all the meetings all this time.
These two made it easy. So
Okay, all right. So let's resume with our agenda. We have one item on old business, presented for possible second reading and final adoption, ordinance 181201, a rezoning ordinance. Any changes, Brett?
no changes from last
Do we
week.
have a motion for second reading?
Moved.
Second.
Motion Bunsen, second by Olson. Questions from the council? Carl, roll call for final adoption?
Councilmember Remley.
Aye.
Lunsman.
Aye.
Slate Hansen.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Bunceness.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Rux.
Aye.
Mayor Leveson.
Aye, motion carries. Item 5, items A through D, routine city business on our consent calendar.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion Rux, second by Lunsman. Questions on any? All in favor of approving those four, then say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. This is the appointed time for a public hearing on the application for a retail malt beverage license at 1603 6th Avenue Southwest, and I don't see anybody here from the public to oppose the license, so I'd entertain a motion from the council to approve.
Move.
Motion Remley and second by Slade Hansen. Any questions on this? All in favor of approving that license, then say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Thanks for your patience. Item B is property tax abatements for property in the city limits. City share is $496 out of a total abatement of $1902. Carl?
Thank you, Mayor. Council, you can see on the request for council action sheet the three different properties that are in making the requests. They're all very straightforward, and I would note that the Brown County Assessor's Office has recommended approval of these abatements.
Moved.
Second.
Motion Bunsen, second by Johnson. Questions, anyone? All those in favor of approving those abatements, then say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. And next, we have our appointment of Tyler Cope to the Business Improvement District. Need a motion to approve
Moved.
that.
Second.
Motion Bunsen, second by Rux. All those in favor of that appointment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Rich is here from the airport with 4 payment requests. They're all to Helms and Associates for the airport, Rich. So why don't you tell us about all 4, and then we'll handle them all at once.
I apologize, I left my notes on my desk. Planning for,
You had plenty of time to go back.
well, I didn't realize that, but
Here you go.
yeah, we've got freezing drizzle coming tonight.
Oh.
At 7.
That's good. I'm on the 5 a.m. plane. Thanks for the notice.
We'll get it on there.
You said you have a 737 coming in?
Yeah, we got a 737 returning from Riverside, and then we've got our scheduled CRJ coming in. So putting together an action plan, just in case the freezing drizzle does come through. So, let's see, payment number 2, requesting council's approval to pay Helms and Associates invoice number 2 in the amount of $1,493, authorize city manager to sign the pay estimate. And this is for design services for reconstruction of taxiway Charlie. We've talked about this one before at council. Okay. Let's see here. Payment number 12, invoice 12, requesting the council's approval to pay Helms and Associates invoice number 12 in the amount of $4,105.88, and authorize city manager to sign the pay estimate. And this is for the wildlife hazard assessment and mitigation plan. And we're currently at 90%, or correction, 69% completed on the wildlife hazard assessment. The next is to request council approval to sign or to pay Helms and Associates in the amount of $4,212.40. Authorize the city manager to sign the invoice, and this is for the passenger boarding bridge. This project actually has started with concrete work, and the actual bridge portion of it was supposed to start tomorrow, but that was pushed out to next week. So the construction crew will be here next Monday, and then the new bridge will arrive on site next Wednesday. And the final one is payment number 5. This is request council approval to pay Helms Associates invoice number 5 in the amount of $13,404.53. Authorize city manager to sign the pay estimate, and this is for the airport master plan. The master plan is 26% complete, and the airport layout plan currently is 2% complete.
Can I add to that? Speaking of the master plan, when he said it was 26% complete, most of the background research has been done. From this point on, now you'll start seeing the public hearing process for input. So I just wanted you to know that we're going to go through a lengthy process with the airport master plan, just like planning and zoning did with their master
It'll be
plan.
approximately a 1-year
Move approval.
process.
Second. Motion Bunceness and second by Johnson to approve all 4 of those payments to Helms. Any questions on any of them? Carl?
Councilmember Rux,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Bunceness.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Slate Hansen.
Aye.
Lunsman.
Aye.
Remley.
Aye.
Mayor Leveson.
Aye, motion carries. Thanks, Rich. Next on the agenda is bills presented for payment tonight from city boards, $145,677. Northwest Energy Utilities, $180. U.S. Bank credit card, $60,677. UPS charges, $35. Burvis Farms, the annual well field payment, $115,260. AT&T monthly phone charges, $1238. Dependable Sanitation July recycling, $22,886. Lime sludge removal at the water plant to Morrison, $17,024. And then we have a number of utility account refunds. $42 to the investment group, $26 to Sharon Frederickson, $38 to Robert Grant, $25 John Meyer, $41 Renee Schnabel, $21 Roger Remain, $40 Matt Biegler, $36 Lori Gerdes, $27 Mark Dorn, $23 Benjamin Moeller, and $41 Steve Darling.
Move approval.
Second. Motion Ruck, second by Olson. Any questions? Carl?
Councilmember Remley.
Aye.
Lunsman.
Aye.
Slate Hansen.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Bunceness.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Rux.
Aye.
Mayor Leveson.
Aye, motion carries. Item F is payroll December 23 to January 5, and City Share of Social Security, Old Age, Survivors, Retirement, Health, and Life.
Moved. Second.
Motion Bunceness, second by Olson. Carl?
Councilmember Rux.
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Bunceness. Johnson.
Aye.
Slate Hansen.
Aye.
Lunsman.
Aye.
Remley.
Aye.
Mayor Leveson.
Aye, motion carries. And with that, we come to item F, or item G, a discussion concerning city-county zoning in the joint jurisdictional area. Ron, you are going to handle this?
I have been tasked, I believe, with giving maybe perhaps the driest speech in all of recorded rhetorical history.
It's a pretty high bar from
So,
some of the other
yeah.
stuff you've done here, so.
Or low bar. So to the extent that I see anybody nodding off, there'll be gentle nudges.
How long is this going to take? He's planned for a half hour.
As the council knows, there has been some question regarding joint jurisdiction and zoning, and I had provided a memo to the council, and it was decided last week that this would be something we should share with the public. And so I want to do something that I usually don't do, which is just read, because I want to be careful in the way that I present this. As I understand the joint jurisdiction area between the city of Aberdeen and Brown County, and I have put on the screen the actual written statement, and I also have a copy here if anybody would like a copy of that as they go, because if there's some way to get yourself to sleep tonight, reading this will do it. State law permits a municipality to adopt zoning regulations as part of the city's comprehensive plan. We've been talking about that all this meeting. If it adopts zoning regulations, it is also required to appoint a planning commission and a zoning board of adjustment. The planning commission makes recommendations to the city council whether to approve or deny petitions to rezone district boundaries, that's just these rezone petitions that we see all the time, to vacate public rights of way, or to plat or replat property. Those are the duties and job description for our planning commission. A zoning board is given the authority to hear appeals from a code enforcement officer's decision, to grant variances to the terms of the zoning ordinances, and to determine conditional land uses authorized by the zoning ordinance. So we can see that the planning commissions and the zoning boards have two very different powers. Counties are required to be organized in the same fashion and also to provide the same bodies, planning commissions and zoning boards, to exercise the same powers as the municipalities. South Dakota municipalities also have the legal authority to expand their corporate limits through voluntary and involuntary annexation. And just as an aside, the city of Aberdeen has not involuntarily annexed anyone in 20 plus years since Brett has been the city planner or the zoning director, so that is not something that we do.
Green.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Planning for this growth as part of each city's comprehensive plan is accommodated by a state law that grants to cities zoning authority within a joint jurisdictional area up to 6 miles outside of the city limits. Aberdeen's zoning ordinance at section 60-3 has set that at 3 miles in all directions. So our planning commission and our zoning boards act on all zoning matters within the city and within the 3 mile area. State law permits a county to choose whether to apply its zoning regulations within an area of joint jurisdiction with a municipality. And here's the statute that sets forth that state law, and specifically, it says that the regulations shall delineate the authority of the governing bodies, and those are the zoning regulations, over all zoning matters pertaining to the joint jurisdictional area. Such regulations may include relinquishment by the county of some or all of its zoning authority within the joint jurisdictional area. This language is important because of what follows, which is our Brown County Commission coordinated the zoning regulations with the city, and I think we're going back at least to the 70s with that coordination, and adopted an ordinance relinquishing its zoning authority within the 3 miles of Aberdeen. So what we're looking at here is the Brown County ordinance dealing with, in Chapter 5, and their Chapter 5 is the zoning regulations for Brown County. But it states specifically that the provisions of Title IV shall apply within the unincorporated areas of Brown County, excluding areas of joint jurisdiction being 3 miles of Aberdeen, along with other cities. So, pursuant to state law, the ordinance that Brown County adopted has relinquished its zoning authority within the 3 mile jurisdiction. Because of its own ordinance, the county's zoning board does not hear appeals of code enforcement decisions, variance requests, and land use exceptions in the 3 mile jurisdiction. This is something that the city zoning board handles exclusively in those matters. Applicants unhappy with the decision of the city zoning board may appeal the decision to circuit court. The city council does not hear appeals of a zoning board decision. This is not the procedure the county uses to appeal the decision by its zoning board. Appeals from a decision of the county zoning board are made to the county commission. Thereafter, if someone is not happy with that decision, they then can appeal that to the circuit court. So again, the city zoning board is the final say for municipal purposes. The city zoning board is acting in the joint jurisdiction, so it's the final say for any decisions regarding, again, variances, special exceptions, and the like. So outside of that, anybody who is aggrieved can go to the circuit court, but they do not go to the city council. I'm sure you're all relieved to not have to deal with those. The planning commission for both the city and county planning commissions operates outside of the zoning regulations except to determine the district boundaries. So that means the rezone petitions. For that reason, the county cannot relinquish its authority to rezone property, approve plats, or vacate rights of way. So that means that the county planning commission meets jointly with the city planning commission each month to hear all such matters in the 3 mile area. So while we have a joint city and county planning commission, we do not have a joint city and county zoning board at this time. Just the city zoning board deals with the 3 mile area. All actions of the planning commission are recommendations to their governing bodies, and you've seen that before. So the planning commission makes a recommendation to either the city council or, in the case of the county, to the county commission, and those councils or commissions are free to make up their own minds after that. And appeals from an adverse decision of the city council or county commission are taken to the circuit court. So again, what I've provided here, as dry as it is what I think to be a fair summary of the state statutes regarding the establishment of zoning regulations and the establishment of zoning boards and planning commissions. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I think that was great.
Seems very clear to me.
Very clear.
Maybe, Ron, maybe you could give us some examples of what would be a zoning decision versus a planning decision. Brett,
Yeah.
just, kind of for
A
the,
zoning decision would be any type of variance, say a building setback, an approach setback, those sorts of things. Now, a planning commission decision would be either approving a plat, approving a rezoning, vacation right away.
And let me make that clear, because I, even coming on board as I have in the last 4 years, this is an archaic and difficult area. But for a variance, you have an ordinance that has very clear language as to what it will or won't allow. For example, it might establish a 10-foot front yard setback. If somebody, for one reason or another, needs that to be changed, they can come to the zoning board and request a variance of that particular clear language in the ordinance. And the zoning board may or may not, depending on criteria that it applies, may or may not grant that. But that's the difference between the zoning board is dealing with the language of an ordinance that clearly typically prohibits something and can, in rare cases, grant a variance of that.
so and the reason that I asked that question is because I think that, people out in the community don't always understand the difference between those two boards. And prior to running for the city council, I served on the planning commission. And so I feel like I have a little more understanding of that. And when I get phone calls from folks who have questions about those type of situations, I do try to make it really clear to them that if they're going before the zoning board, then they have to be prepared that if they lose, they have to go to circuit court. There's no appeal to the city council. Versus if they're going before planning, there is an appeal to their city council or the county commission, depending, what area they're in, whether that was a joint decision or whether that was city. So I think that some of the things that we've seen recently, I'd say within the last 6 to 12 months, we've seen a couple of issues where people were outside of the 1 mile, they were in that 3 mile area, and they had concerns, there were zoning issues, they had concerns, and they went to the county commission, and the county commission didn't seem maybe to understand how to help those folks, and what I saw written in the newspaper was frustrating to me because I didn't feel like it didn't have the good understanding of how you just explained it to us. It didn't have that good understanding of how this process works. And I think that's unfortunate that people in the community, but we shouldn't, we don't necessarily expect people in the community to understand. You just said it's an archaic system. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to revisit that, help people in the community understand that, help our, work with our friends over at the county commission so we can work with this in the future and see if we can, maybe tweak that a little and do something to really help the citizens who are being affected by this negatively.
Yeah, I think one of the important pieces to this, and you're absolutely right, I believe we need to be educated. I believe we understand that on this council, but it appears that some people at the county don't understand this information and what I'm seeing in articles. So I think the important piece, one of the important pieces out of this is that the county relinquished their ability to have any impact on the first 3 miles. They relinquished that. And so there was a reason for that 20, 30, 40 years ago. We don't know that reason, but that is the law that we have to go by. And that's why the city is involved in the first 3 miles.
I think another thing the public needs to understand that a variance is not a negative term. Granting a variance is not forgiving a sin. The ability to grant a variance is there to either do it or not do it if there's justification. So it shouldn't be regarded as somebody getting away with something. It's part of the process.
Right.
And to touch on some of the things that you said, Jennifer, when people come to our front counter, we walk them through the whole process, whether they're going through the planning commission or the zoning board. They know up front what each step is going to be. Staff is very good about doing that with them. And then they know in advance what the recommendation is going to be. So if we're recommending denial on something, they know that they've got some time to sit and prepare a rebuttal for that. And most of them do. So they like I say, we walk everybody through the process. They may not be happy with the end result, but they're all walked through the process. We don't just, throw them out there and say, oh, by the way, you're applying for this. Here's the application. We'll see you at the meeting. We try and make sure we walk them through everything, whether in the 3 mile or otherwise.
Lynn?
Brett, you handed out this summary of requests for extraterritorial jurisdiction, but you footnoted it when you were talking to me. So can you explain to the council what you told me earlier about how many we've actually reviewed within the last 3 or 4 year period and the adjustment that you'd have to make because of some recurring?
Yeah, it can put this together for us. And it shows the years and how many zoning board requests are within the extraterritorial jurisdiction. And you have to remember that through, say, May, June, there's anywhere from, say, 6 to 8 of those items are fireworks stands. So if you take those out, that really drops that number drastically as to how many items go through the zoning board within that 3 mile jurisdiction.
And I would like to add something as well. Number one, the zoning board makeup typically has included somebody who lives within that 3 mile jurisdiction.
We've always, ever since I've been here, I've included at least one individual from the 3 mile jurisdiction on the Board of Zoning Adjustment. I don't know if the county commission's aware of that, but that's something that we have always done on our own.
And secondly, the city zoning regulations and the county zoning regulations aren't a comparison between American law and Bangladeshi law. What you see with the city zoning regulations and the county zoning regulations and almost a 90% duplication of those. So they're dealing with very similar, if not identical, language most of the time. So when the zoning board, for example, in the 3 mile jurisdiction is dealing with an access approach issue, for example, it is interpreting the exact same language that the county zoning board would be dealing with outside of the 3 mile jurisdiction. So these regulations are very, very similar.
I also had Brett do some research to find out if we were different in our makeup. And so I asked him to contact other Class 1 cities to find out how we fared within comparison purposes. And would you be kind enough to talk about some of your findings there?
Well, with Rapid City and Pennington County, Rapid City only has planning jurisdiction within the platting jurisdiction within that 3 mile limit. And it's been that way for, I've been here 20 years. I started in Rapid, so it was that way when I was there. Sioux Falls, they sit jointly on everything, but as we were told by staff, they have not sat jointly they don't know when. So they've never met.
So basically, the city control is dictating.
Actually, from the sound of it, they just don't have a lot of items that happen within that 3 mile jurisdiction, which I find hard to believe. But their ordinances are a little different than ours. They're a little tighter than ours are. Brookings in Brookings County, they operate the same way we do. So.
Okay. Any other questions of this? So, thanks.
Yes.
That was enlightening for all of us, I think. Probably overdue for all of us to understand better. For me, anyway.
I was on the edge of my seat.
Okay. Lynn, anything for the city manager report?
Yes, I have 2 quick items. Annually, I put together a citywide significant accomplishment list that comes from the various different departments. I gave that to you within the city manager's report. In addition, that is on the front page of our website. So if anyone wonders what the police department's done for 2018, they can go in and look at that report. And then likewise, I gave you a listing of years of service with the city of Aberdeen. And I guess what I'm going to say, if you ever run into Ricky Lipp or Mark Hoven, you have to give them all sorts of accolades. It's not very often that you have 2 outstanding employees that have 40 years of service with the city of Aberdeen.
Great job.
Yep. That it?
That's it.
Anything from anyone else before we adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion Business, second by Johnson to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're